This meeting is now being recorded.
Great. So I'm going to let them take it away, but as I said, very delighted to have with us today Sara Matthew, who's with the Forum for Youth Investment with their Opportunity Youth Network, and Yelena Nemoy, who's with the Aspen Institute, Forum for Community Solutions with the Opportunity Youth Incentive Fund.
Thank you, Abra. Hello, everyone. As Abra mentioned, I am with the Forum for Youth Investment, and we are co-convener of the Opportunity Youth Network, and joined by my colleague Yelena, who at Aspen Institute Forum for Community Solutions manages the Opportunity Youth Incentive Fund, which she's going to talk a little bit about later on. But we're so excited and thrilled to be here and to share with you guys a little bit about our work in terms of Opportunity Youth housing and the safety and stability it provides is such a critical piece to ensuring that young people and their families are connected to pathways of success. So we're excited and encouraged by some of the great programming that we've been seeing, particularly around cross-system and cross-sector work in the housing space to make sure that young people are able to thrive. And so we're excited to be able to connect with you all and share a little bit about the specific population of young people that we focus our work around, Opportunity Youth. We plan on just giving you guys a high-level overview of the work happening in the field, and then just highlighting some ways you as housing folks can either have been plugged in or could potentially be plugged in. So we're hoping for an interactive and engaging conversation, and we're hoping that this is just a start of a conversation and we can continue post-webinar. So just some level setting. When we talk about Opportunity Youth, we're referring to 16 and 24-year-olds that are not in school and not employed. I know there's a bunch of different terms out there to describe kind of the same group of young people. So some of you may have heard idle youth, which a lot of economists use and a lot of researchy type things and spaces. You may have heard disconnected youth, which is a term that we sometimes use interchangeably with Opportunity Youth. And then Opportunity Youth, just a little context about that term, was popularized by John Bridgman back in 2012 as really a more positive and optimistic way to refer to these young people, since they represent an enormous untapped potential for our society. But when you guys are looking at research around this young group of people, you'll notice that sometimes definitions either vary by different factors, whether it's the length of time someone needs to be connected to school and work, which affects if they're incorporating young people who are out of school and being surveyed during the summer, whether young people are still actively seeking employment, and whether specific research methods or definitions incorporate special categories of young people or attempt to incorporate them, whether that's young people in the justice system, young people involved in child welfare systems, or even young people experiencing homelessness. So while there's no universally accepted definition of this term, I think really at the core, all of these different terms emphasize and focus in and refer to young people that are not in school and not employed. And I think we really like to place an emphasis and really acknowledge that this is a group of young people that are resilient, and us as adults, really have a strong responsibility to cultivate and create environments that tap into that potential. So now that we've kind of established who we're talking to, who we're talking about, I think this is perfect timing that we're hosting this presentation because Measure for America, this really awesome social science research group, just released their newest data around Opportunity Youth at the end of March. And so we know that there are just under 4.9 million disconnected young people living in the U.S. So that's approximately 1 in 8 young people between that age group, or 12.3% of young people. And so the good news is, and which we're really excited about, especially at the national level, is that that number is moving in the right direction. There's been a steady decline since 2010. In 2010, that was the post-recession high. We had about 5.8 million disconnected youth, and that was the peak post-recession. And so from that 5-year time span, we've seen a decline in approximately 900,000 less young people that are disconnected. And so that's the great news, and we're excited about that. Still a large chunk of young people, and we still have a lot of work to do, but it's definitely moving in the right direction. The bad and ugly news is that the gender and racial gaps are unrelenting and persistent. Nationally, we see that girls and young women are slightly less likely to be disconnected than boys and young men. So you'll see those little tiny icons. Nationally, women are at 12%, a disconnected rate, and for men, that's 12.5%. And those are, a small but statistically significant difference. But when you start to look at and disaggregate the data by gender and race and ethnicity, you begin to see starker differences. And I didn't include the slide in this deck, but usually I show before this all of the different major racial and ethnic groups and what their specific disconnection rates are. This slide only highlights the major groups that are above, their disconnected rates are above the U.S. average of 12.3%. And so I'll just share the numbers. Asian American young people are at 7.2%. For white young people, that's 10.1%. And I do want to flag that although these young people of color in the slide that I'm showing are disproportionately disconnected, young white people, 16 to 24, really do make up the lion's share of absolute numbers of young people that are disconnected. So when you're talking about just under 4.9 million nationally for young white people, that's about just over 2 million. So that's an important group to still focus our attention on. And another reason why I like to show this slide is just to emphasize the critical role that disaggregated data plays in helping leaders really think about how to target your supports, particularly when you're talking about the role that this data can help influence when you're talking about programming implications and how that can affect outcomes. And so I just wanted to rattle off a couple of stats just to drop folks on the phone to think about in terms of programming. So for disconnected young women, nearly 4 times the rate of connected women to be young mothers, right? So as program cultivators, if we're creating spaces in which we don't have 2-generational or multi-generational strategies that we're employing, where we're targeting the parent and the child at the same time, or even if our programming doesn't involve or provide opportunities for child care, we could be potentially missing out on a whole segment of disconnected women. For disconnected men, they're 50% more likely to be living with a disability. So in fact, 1 in 5 disconnected boys and young men are living with a disability. And then when you talk about disaggregating data both by race and gender, in terms of reconnecting to education or employment, we see for Latino males nationally that there's a more of a challenge area in connecting them to educational pathways, whereas for Black males, we're seeing more of a challenge around connection towards employment pathways. And so those are just little nuggets to kind of keep in mind in terms of programming development. And if you're interested in learning more, specifically in getting opportunity to use data for your particular community, Measure of America has just recently launched an interactive website, which is really cool because you can, get down to your metro area, your congressional district. You can see where your place ranks in terms of disconnected youth rates in comparison to the nation. And then if you look at their report, Promising Gains, Persistent Gaps, Youth Disconnection in America, they have some really good data on each of the different major racial groups and the data that we're finding in terms of disaggregated data. So that was my little plug in getting your own opportunity use data. And then 2 other resources I want to flag is the National Equity Atlas, and you can also find disconnected youth rates on that website. And one of the features that I really love about that is you can actually find out how many of those disconnected youth are native born versus either immigrants or first generation. And then Opportunity Index is another great interactive website where you can find out not only the disconnected youth rate, but just the broader opportunity rates in your particular county. So now I will turn it to Yelena. We'll talk a little bit about our history and roles in terms of the opportunity youth movement.
Thank you, Sara, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. So before we wanted to, share a little bit about each of our individual initiatives, we wanted to really highlight the broader framework of our work. And it's really important because for both Opportunity Youth Network, for the Aspen Forum for Community Solutions, and for Opportunity Youth United, to whom we will also speak, we have a common origin and a common approach to focus on innovative work that's place-based, so really rooted in the community in terms of the design of solutions, and that's really rooted in collaboration in order to reconnect opportunity youth, and also youth voices at the center of our work. And that is because all three of us really came out from the White House Council on Community Solutions. We capitalized to launch on the momentum that was created by that work, and they released the report called Community Solutions for Opportunity Youth that you could download from a link from this presentation. And they really focused on this asset-based framework that Sara described, that John Bridgeland designed, really moving from the disconnected youth label to opportunity youth in order to emphasize the importance of those young people to really the economic growth, to the vibrancy of our communities. And that report also called for collaborative solutions to the issue of young people who were disconnected and whose potential wasn't really being tapped. And youth voice and leadership, they're really core value for us. We go by nothing for us without us. We really feel that young leaders need to be at the center of this work, not just even identifying problems, but also designing solutions. And so when we'll talk about Opportunity Youth United a little bit later, that will be reflected as well. And I'll turn it back to Sara.
All right. So thank you, Yelena. So OYN was launched with key leaders from about 100 national organizations back in March 2013. And as Yelena mentioned, really just to capitalize on that momentum created by the White House Council of Community Solutions. The network is co-managed by the Forum for Youth Investment, GAP Inc., and Aspen Forum for Community Solutions. And really what we do is think about nationally, how do we bring together cross-sector leaders who really care about this population? So we bring together foundations, corporations, government, nonprofits, and most importantly, young leaders themselves. We have this one big mega goal, reconnecting 1 million disconnected youth over 5 years. And the way that we do that is prioritizing continually taking stock of progress in the field and really holding the field accountable to that goal. Thinking about how to align related efforts, thinking about the deficiencies of scales, can we leverage one another's work, particularly around cross-sector efforts. And then this last piece of catalyzing efforts where we see that there are gaps. And I would say as a network and as a field, we're really seeing a lot of focus around opportunity use, in the federal government administration, and we'll talk about some initiatives that came out of the last administration in the private sector with 100K, which is 100,000 opportunities. And so just this great amount of efforts popping up in each sector that we really have an eye towards these next couple of years, focusing in and honing in on how do we make sure that we're aligning those efforts. And then each year we host our annual Opportunity Youth Network Summit, and that really just serves as our anchor activity. It provides our stakeholders across the sectors to have a chance to really get updates on the field, to think about new ways to collaborate, to hear from young people themselves, and really just help us set priorities for the following year. And that summit this year will be in November here in D.C. And then in terms of ongoing activities, a lot of our stuff are behind-the-scenes alignment working groups that often are informal, but we also host online meetings with our network that really focus in on the information sharing and then having alignment discussions on particular topics or on project areas. And so I just wanted to flag and quickly share 2 recent projects and priority areas in terms of our work at the Opportunity Youth Network. One is really about the intersection of boys and men of color and opportunity youth. In the past few years, there's been so much momentum happening in the boys and men of color space and in the opportunity youth spaces respectively, right, with the My Brother's Keeper initiative and now My Brother's Keeper Alliance, groups like Campaign for Black Male Achievement, all these great place-based efforts happening. And so we were hearing from folks on the ground that there was this real need to have a set of resources that help leaders think about what it means to serve the intersection of these 2 groups. So we did a lit review, worked with members of our network, other experts and practitioners to really pull together and compile a set of promising practices and strategies, and also resources that people who are working the boys and men of color space could take on to ensure that they're also working and serving and supporting the hardest to serve of that group, disconnected boys and men of color. And so the playbook kicks off with a set of cross-cutting strategies, and then it's organized in what some of you may have seen, the My Road to Keeper 6 critical milestones. Each section has an overview and kind of the latest data and research around that particular critical milestone, and then strategies for taking action, and then links to either key organizations or resources that we encourage folks to take advantage of. And I really would encourage each of you to take a look at the toolkit. Milestone 6 highlights strategies and resources specifically for disconnected boys and young men of color that are in second chance systems, including those experiencing homelessness. And so there's some really great strategies and resources that might be helpful. And then the second piece and strand of the work lately that we've really been focusing a lot of our attention on is this new campaign to reconnect 1 million opportunity youth. At the end of last year, we worked with a couple of other groups to have John Bridgeland and commission him to do a federal scan of where funding stood for different programs that focused on disconnected youth. And with all the momentum and excitement and things that have been happening over the past couple of years around opportunity youth, we expected the numbers to either at least be leveled or increase in terms of the past 5 years when we first did this report. And to our surprise and actually our huge disappointment, we'd realized that Congress had cut 100,000 opportunities for youth to reconnect each year from 2012 to 2015. And so that really energized us to do a really targeted appropriations campaign to increase funding for disconnected youth. And so I just wanted to flag that for folks, and if you're interested in learning more, one of the things that the network is doing is really pulling together Opportunity Youth United, which Yelena will talk about in a second, the members of Opportunity Youth Incentive Fund, which are folks, place-based organizations and groups on the ground like OIIF and P3, which I'll talk about shortly, and to really champion them and help support them in contacting their legislators to really think about how they can increase funding for disconnected youth. And so if you're interested in being a part of that work or joining folks in your community that are interested in that work, please let me know and we'll provide a contact at the end.
Thank you, Sara. So wanted to share a little bit also about Opportunity Youth United. They're a really core part of our work, as Sara just shared. They describe themselves as a solutions-oriented movement of young adults who have experienced poverty and are dedicated to creating a society with opportunity and responsibility, love and respect, education and employment, justice and equality for all. So Opportunity Youth United is coordinated on the national level by the National Council of Young Leaders, who are representatives across the nation that are being sponsored to participate by various organizations such as Just for the Future, Public Allies, Aspen Forum for Community Solutions. And on the national level, OIM has partnered with the National Council of Young Leaders and the Opportunity Youth United movement to promote those youth-led solutions for reconnecting 1 million opportunity youth. And then on a place-based strategy level, as Sara said, we'll talk about it in a minute, Aspen Forum, we're partnering with OYU, National Council of Young Leaders, to help us and really help our communities design innovative community-based strategies to engage young people in identifying the problem and the solution, the design of pathways to and from, be it re-engagement, dropout re-engagement and prevention, secondary education completion, post-secondary education and careers. And also, they're helping us think through how do we form those equitable, authentic, and meaningful partnerships between young people and their adult allies in order to promote the system and policy change that's required in order to reconnect young people. And we really wanted to put a plug for the Opportunity Youth United report called Recommendations to Increase Opportunity and Decrease Poverty in America. They're very, simple recommendations that make sense from the programmatic standpoint, from the youth leadership standpoint, from the policy standpoint, and we really recommend everyone who is interested in this work to pull up the report and take a look at it.
Yes, we love Opportunity Youth United. They're a phenomenal group of young people.
Yeah.
And since Yelena and I have been talking quite a bit, we want to hear from you all before we segue into the place-based focus part of our work. We want you guys to share, are you familiar with Opportunity Youth Incentive Fund? And if you could use the poll to select yes, you have one in your community and you're connected to the partnership, you're either at the table, or yes, you have one in your community but you're not connected to the partnership, that you're somewhat familiar, you've heard of it, know a little bit about it, or finally, no, I'm not familiar. All right. And I guess maybe Abra, do we have to go through all the questions at once?
So I think I have to wait until I close it. So it looks like there might be maybe one more of you. If we just want to give it one more minute, if anyone's still filling it out, it looks like maybe one person has not.
It's like Jeopardy. Gotta do.
There we go. Great. Okay, thank you so much. So let's see if I close this. Did that show the responses?
No, I don't.
Here we go.
think so.
You're not seeing them?
Nope. Oh, it's okay. I am curious if folks don't mind typing into the public chat. Maybe we'll skip down to the last question. Are you currently doing any OY-related programming, anything related to Opportunity Youth in your community? If you want to type into the public chat, just say yes, a no, maybe, not sure, or just a hello. Awesome. Yes, we're currently providing Opportunity Youth programming in Denver. Nice. Thank you. Thank you, Lynn. Great. Nice, Courtney. We've started conversations with a regional group, Community Center for Educational Results, that is doing work in the Seattle area. Perfect. And then maybe we'll just give it another 30 seconds to see if anyone else wants to chime in. Perfect. Joe, I'm curious, what's the term you guys are using? I like to kind of gauge. How do they classify the young people at their service? You don't use any particular term. Gotcha. Thank you. Perfect. Well, thank you for your responses in Akron. Perfect. Thank you. Great. And actually, you guys have talked a little bit about a couple places that we've seen some great opportunity work happening. So I'll turn over to Yelena to share a little bit about the Opportunities Incentive Fund.
Thank you. And so the Community Center for Education Results is actually one of our sites, so that's great to see, and so is Denver. But the mission of the Aspen Forum for Community Solutions is to support community collaboration. We do place an emphasis on collective impact, but we also realize there's just one model of collaboration. And we're really looking to enable communities to effectively address their most pressing challenges, and we believe that work happens in place in the communities. The Opportunity Youth Incentive Fund, or OYF, is the first funding collaborative that we launched. And the goal of the OYF is to support a network of urban, rural, and tribal communities with multi-year grants. The communities design and scale comprehensive second chance reconnection pathways that we hope and we believe achieve better outcomes in education and employment for opportunity youth. And we really, our mission and our values are equity-based and social justice-based. So we believe that in focusing on educational and career pathways, we're really interrupting the multi-generational cycle of poverty, which ultimately is undermining our communities, right, and the health and the vibrancy of our communities and neighborhoods. So this is really a long-term systems change initiative. So we fund the backbone function. So that's the organization like the Community Center for Education Results that brings together the collaborative that identifies the shared agenda that works on system change. Those collaboratives look a little bit different in each community, but they're really cross-system and cross-sector. So what are those multiple systems that are touching opportunity youth, workforce, education, housing, higher ed, child welfare, juvenile justice, employers, funders, local and state governments, and again, young people at the center. And I will briefly flash. This is where our communities are and show the geographic spread. So we're mostly in larger and mid-sized urban areas, but we also have a cohort of rural and tribal communities. And we also have several initiatives that kind of slot in under the OYF umbrella. One is Opportunity Works, and that's a social innovation fund-funded initiative that we do in partnership with Jobs for the Future. And you could see that's the orange color. They support specifically transition to post-secondary education and the workforce with an emphasis on engaging boys and young men of color using the Jobs for the Future Back on Track model. And then the 100,000 Opportunities Initiative, that's a coalition of, at this point, over 50 leading U.S.-based companies that have committed to training and hiring opportunity youth that's being pulled together by Schultz Family Foundation and Starbucks in partnership also with Aspen Forum. The 100,000 Opportunities Initiative demonstration cities effort, that's in 5 communities. You could see it in a light blue color. And they focus on testing and scaling employer-led pathways in a subset of those communities. And that's really about engaging employers in designing pathways to entry-level jobs that can also scale up to careers or develop skills that young people need to move on in their careers. So in the course of doing this work, we learned a few lessons, and I really recommend looking at this blog by our evaluation partner, Equal Measure, where they go more in-depth into a variety of barriers that young people face. But what we found is the key barriers that I pulled up here are organizational silos is a very big barrier because opportunity youth have a variety of issues. There are health issues, childcare, housing, access, food. They have fines and fees resulting from juvenile justice involvement, etc. And so when those systems and providers aren't working together, these challenges are not really being addressed in a comprehensive manner. A lot of work is being duplicated, or young people have to shuffle between programs. What OYF collaboratives are doing is integrating through those cross-sector partnerships, education, employment, those stabilization services that we know are really critical. And what they're helping providers do is really change their mindsets and think holistically about serving opportunity youth with a whole system. And they're also promoting policies and procedures that help bust those silos, that help promote collaboration, that help promote alignment of services instead of services being duplicated and replicated. The other barrier is eligibility criteria, which I think is really relevant, especially to housing, because we know that publicly funded programs especially often maintain very strict eligibility criteria, age, documentation status, criminal history, and all of those can pose additional barriers to reconnection. So Sara will talk a little bit later about P3 and how that's being addressed through that initiative, but for our collaboratives, they're working with policymakers and agencies to really think through how the rules that deny opportunity can perpetuate the systemic inequity and lack of access. And many of our collaboratives have been successful at implementing some of those systemic changes, for example, extending benefits to youth in foster care through age 26, so that they can continue receiving benefits to support their education, or working with their communities to pass second chance employment pathways laws, which happened in Austin, which bars looking at criminal histories at the beginning of the application process. And the other barrier that I also, and lesson learned that I also wanted to flag is location and transportation. There are systemic barriers, and then there are those unique place-based barriers. As many of us know, long commutes, there is lack of accessible public transportation, or simply the cost of transportation can really limit access to housing, to employment, to education opportunities. And so a lot of our collaboratives are really focusing on collaborating with partners that are located nearby. They're looking at co-locating services. They're looking at placing services in areas that are being underserved, or where opportunity youth are found, just really ensuring that services are readily accessible, which is really essential for this population. And so one of the things where I think housing becomes extremely relevant is because this is the place where services can be co-located, because this is where young people who are disconnected from school and work can also be found often. And I will now turn it over to Sara to talk about performance partnership pilots.
Great. Thank you, Yelena. Yeah, so another really cool, innovative opportunity to plug in, or if you're not in one of these 16 places, learn from are these 16 sites who have developed, similar to what Yelena described, a coherent, data-informed plan to use their current federal resources for disconnected youth in better ways. And this is all a part of a federal initiative called the Performance Partnership Pilots for Disconnected Youth. Just a little bit about P3. It's informally often referred to as P3. So the federal government launched a set of pilots that really allowed local, state, and tribal agencies to think about how they would want to better serve disconnected youth. It kind of flipped the way we currently operate on its head, right? This top-down approach, it really just let folks on the ground say, you know what, I have these young people that walk through my door, and I want to be able to do X, Y, and Z for them, but I can't because of some federal bureaucratic policy or barriers that prevent me from coordinating with folks across systems, right? And so I love this image because it's actually a real depiction from Los Angeles County of one family's connection through a variety of programs within these very siloed, fragmented agencies. And it's obvious that it's very, disjointed, it's confusing, and if you're a family or a young person walking in through the door, you may qualify something depending if you walk through the HUD door versus child welfare, right? Like the Department of Health's definition of what constitutes a young person that's homeless is very different than how HUD defines that. And so this is very confusing, inefficient, and ineffective. And for program leads, and they can't provide the coordinated services that they want for the young people that walk through that door. And so P3 really provides a unique opportunity for system leads to think about and paint a broader picture of how to serve this population. So what you get with a P3, I should say, is really three basic things. You get the opportunity to blend your existing discretionary federal funds for disconnected youth across different systems. So you can pool your HUD funding and your workforce dollars, and you can blend them all together to create a more coordinated program or approach to serving young people. And the current identity or the reporting requirements associated with those individual funding streams would no longer exist. Right now you've come up with a brand new approach in which you no longer have to report to these HUD dollars and these workforce dollars and these education dollars in very time-consuming ways. The second thing that it really does, and I kind of hit on this, is allows folks to say, you know what, the eligibility requirements that Yelena talked about that are often mandated at the federal level, that doesn't work for our population here on the ground, or we want to align the different definitions across different agencies, federal agencies. And so it really allows folks to say, these are the policy barriers that originate at the federal level, and this is the flexibility we want from them. And then the last piece that sites really get is just a small startup grant that really helps them improve capacity and think about how to better coordinate across different agencies and systems. And then so P3 is fairly early in its stages. There's been 3 rounds. Technically, only 1 round has been formally announced. Round 2 and 3 should be announced soon publicly. And what's pretty cool about the second and third round, it actually include HUD and DOJ dollars. Originally, the legislation only incorporated Labor H, which is Department of Labor, Department of Health and Human Services, the Department of Education, the Corporation for National Community Service, and the Institute for Museum and Library Sciences. And so now the round 2 and 3 have now been expanded to also incorporate programs and funding that flows from HUD and DOJ. And I wanted to pull out one example from round 1. Even though HUD wasn't officially, HUD dollars weren't officially on the table to be able to be blended, one community, Indianapolis, actually made housing a centerpiece of their P3 proposal. And so I just wanted to share a little bit about their idea and in hopes that it either inspires folks, if you're in Indianapolis, connecting with them, or learning from some of the lessons that they've kind of chugged through. So they're focusing on 8 low-income disconnected youth who are between the ages of 14 and 24, focusing in on those young people who are living in 2 public housing communities. And they have deemed them inside their city's Opportunity Zone, which is a collective impact initiative that's modeled on Northside Achievement Zone in Minneapolis, if you're familiar with that. And so they have a project partner called Indiana Black Expo who's going to provide 2 connectors. In other places, sometimes they're called navigators, who will help 40 young people at a time develop individual service and success plans. They're going to help those young people kind of access and navigate services, and they've kind of accumulated a set of 40 to 50 public and private nonprofit partners. So they have folks like their local workforce development board, Employee Indy, and they're a major healthcare provider at the table. So they're going to help those young people really think about how to access services and kind of navigate that really crazy world. And so the way that they're doing it is blending funds from Youth Build and also blending funds from the youth program authorized by Title I of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, also known as WIOA. And so they're going to provide employment and training services with those dollars. And they're also going to braid in funds from the adult program authorized by Title I of WIOA. And the housing agency there will use some of their Section 3 training funds to provide training services to the public housing residents there. So it's really this all hands on deck, coordinated, comprehensive, concentrated services to these young people who are living in these 2 public housing communities. And so with that, I think we are done giving the broad, high-level overview of some things that we hope are relevant and helpful in terms of the work that you're doing in your communities. And Abra, I think you were going to help facilitate this piece.
Yeah. So thank you so much, both of you. That was really great. And I think especially for folks who weren't already familiar with P3, I think that was probably pretty interesting for a lot of people joining us today. I know that we've been hearing more about Section 3 funds from the current HUD staff, so that might be something for folks to do a little bit more research into. Before we dive into some of the discussion questions that are up on the screen, I wanted to just check in with you both to see if you had any additional things you wanted to say. Sara, I know you had asked Jill a question in the chat, which she responded to, so I just wanted to pause for a moment and see if there were any follow-ups from the poll or other things that the 2 of you wanted to talk about. I also, if it's okay with everyone, I think because we're a smaller group today, I'm going to go ahead and take everyone off mute. So if you want to verbally ask a question as opposed to typing it or have more of a conversation, that will be possible. And I would just ask everyone to, when you're not speaking, keep your own phone on mute so that we can avoid that background noise.
So I would just say one that I kind of touched on this in the beginning, that we're so excited to have this conversation because not always are HUD folks at the table, or even transportation folks, which are obviously two critical pieces when you talk about re-engaging and reconnecting young people to employment opportunities and the stability and safety that housing provides. And honestly, especially when you talk about public housing as a stationary place where programming can happen, where young people live. And so it's such an amazing venue to channel programming and supports. And so we're excited to be able to have this conversation. And some of the discussion questions we teed up were really kind of touching on that thing that we're viewing in across the country of, how do we ensure that housing authorities can play a role and are at the tables in terms of this opportunity to work. And to hear from folks, particularly if there's been any barriers to your participation and your experiences in being involved with the youth employment conversation and the reconnection to education pathways conversations happening in your community. No barriers. What about, so for some of the folks that said that they are working and connecting with opportunity youth in their community, so the Denvers and the Seattle folks that are hoping or soon to be connecting, can you guys share a little bit about what that process is like? How did you come to the table? Were you already at the table? Did others engage you? Courtney, if you don't mind, I know I'm putting you on the spot.
No, that's totally okay. So this is Courtney with Seattle Housing Authority. So CCER, the Community Center for Education Results, is really well known in our community and in our county. And I think it took us time in our work in education to get to a point where we were ready to focus on opportunity youth. And a lot of our early work was around enrolled students in our largest public school district. And so the data that we had and the gaps we were able to identify, and a lot of our work really has centered around working primarily with Seattle Public Schools. So in terms of opportunity youth, I think it has been a struggle for us to figure out kind of where to get traction. So CCER has really played a point, and we met probably a month ago with them to talk specifically about opportunity youth. And I think we're trying to get traction on where it makes sense for us to be in that space. So that's why I was interested in learning more today, because I would say we have a gap as a housing authority in this area, and especially related to our education work. So we are early in this. We were trying to get traction, trying to figure out where to start while still staying focused on our kind of K-12 school district partnership. So I'm interested in learning where others have gotten traction as a housing authority, and just kind of to get a better understanding. And I think you guys did a really nice job of giving a really clear overview today, so it was really helpful.
Good. Hi, guys. This is Lynn from Denver. In Denver, we've been working specifically focused around opportunity youth or disconnected youth or whatever what term we'd like. Probably right. For, I would say, at least the last 10 to 15 years. We have a program here in Denver called the Youth Employment Academy, which approximately 5 years ago became an independent 501c3 that's wholly owned by the Housing Authority to focus specifically on those services. We offer connections to get young people back in school or to help them get job readiness skills. We have an academy model whereby young people can do a 48-hour academy and get a national certification in an emerging industry here in Denver. And the goal is certainly not to take the place of education providers, but to be that first step to help make that connection so that a job can turn into a career ladder as opposed to a dead end, basically. We have worked with the public school systems, the Denver public school system, as well as the community college system, University of Colorado, to make all of those connections. They actually come in to help us teach. And actually the public school has hired us to do some spring break camps for them and then some camps in the summer around those different areas. We've worked for years with the city of Denver as well. They do a summer youth employment program. The city of Denver is involved in, I want to say, in the Opportunity Youth Collaborative that was spoke about earlier, but it's more of at a theoretical level, not necessarily being instituted on the streets yet. You know what I mean? We know it exists, but we haven't, you know what I mean? It hasn't actually reached the point where it's doing anything with the young people yet, but certainly conversations are happening.
Lynn, this is Yelena, and I'm just curious if you see some barriers getting involved with a collaborative, for example, because it seems to me that your work is, pretty aligned with what I know of their work by working with them. They're actually working with Emily Griffith on a GED Plus pilot, and so that's where their efforts have been primarily. And also now that the Backbone moved, the Backbone used to be with the Rose Community Foundation, and now they're with the Denver Chamber of Commerce. So they're also focusing on that first job and employment. And so I'm just wondering, in terms of, housing authorities, like, what are the, barriers you're seeing? And this is to you, but also anyone else who maybe tried and hadn't been able to get traction. Like, what are the barriers, for involvement that you see? They'll just really be informative for us to know as we think about kind of next stages of our work as well.
Okay. And we are familiar with actually Amy Banker, who works with the Youth Employment Academy, is serving with the Denver Chamber of Commerce with the Youth Opportunity Youth Board, or their community connection. So we are making that connection with them. We've had conversations about if they can connect with their members to create job leads for our young people after they've had training and stuff. So the conversations are happening. It just not far enough down the line yet. That's all.
Oh no, gotcha. I understand. Thank you.
Any other questions or thoughts folks want to throw out to us or share with us? Because I'd love to learn from you as well and tap into your expertise about what it looks like for housing authorities to play a role in reconnection.
So this is Courtney in Seattle. I would love to share the PowerPoint that was presented today with my colleague who works for Seattle Public Schools as the Housing and Education Manager. So that would be really helpful to get access to that. So I don't know if that's Abra providing it or if you guys send it, but I'd be really appreciative of that.
Yeah, I'm more than happy. In a couple of days when the recording is available, I will put that up. Actually, you guys may have noticed in the email, it'll be on the housingiz.org website for those of you who haven't had a chance to check that out yet. There is a private community for this education working group, so that is taking place at the Google Drive that I was previously putting the recordings on. So look for more details on that. But yes, I'm also happy. I assume it's okay with both of you, Yelena and Sara, to share the slide deck?
Absolutely.
Of course.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So Courtney, happy to email that to you, and anyone else, I can share that as well.
That'd be great.
And our emails are also in the. Oh, thank you for pulling them up. So if anyone is specifically interested in OYF, is there a local collaborative, how to connect to them? We're actually in the moment planning our big convening in Boston. so my response time might be a little slow, but I'm very much happy to respond to any questions, schedule a call, get you in touch with a collaborative if you're interested. So please contact on my end. I don't want to speak for Sara, but contact me if you have any interest in, further connections with an OYF.
Yelena, you can speak for me too. Same here. If you're interested in specific OI programming strategies, that toolkit is a great resource. We would love to even have a quick call with you to talk a little bit about and point you to specific examples of places and specific resources. We can have a tailored conversation to your community. So please feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much for giving such a thoughtful presentation. I learned a lot, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. It's really
Yeah.
exciting. I think Sara said everything I would have said, but it's really exciting for us because it is such a, and for me, from the standpoint of doing this work with the communities, housing is such a critical resource. So it's a really great opportunity for us to also plant the seed of this work and get introduced to a network.
Well, I definitely want to echo thanks. If there are any questions that folks have, you can definitely send them to me, or you saw the email contact information on the screen. Feel free to be in touch with either of the presenters directly. But I agree. This was really great, and I think very timely. I think this, continues to be a really important topic for this intersection. So glad that you could. And if there's nothing else, other heads up that more details to come about the rest of the webinars that we have for this year, as well as other events in the pipeline. But thanks so much, Sara and Yelena.
Have a great week, everyone.
All right. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.